One of the first things you want to understand about the nature of human communication is that people can only ever reveal to you where they are in themselves. They do this through what they say, what they don't say, and through how they say it. Their tone, their word choice, the way they look at you or assess you, all has to do with their own neuro-activations. All of their verbal and nonverbal assessments and expressions have to do with their hardwiring. They can't see past their least action pathways, past the commonly fired and activated neural pathways that they formed and continuously make use of to make sense of their environment and themselves. They can essentially only ever see themselves. They can only essentially ever see their own beliefs, their own conclusions about themselves, about human nature, about the world, and so on and so forth. They can only see what they've wired themselves to be and what they've conditioned themselves, neurologically conditioned themselves, and so have convinced themselves the world is. And the same goes for you. Your tone, your word choice, the way you look at others or the way you assess others, the way you assess your world, the meanings that you create, all have to do with your own neuroactivations, the associations and meanings you've made a part of your framework. And these associations, and there are countless of them that you formed from the time you could make links about what things are and what things mean. These associations basically exist as networks of neurons in the brain, clusters or communities of neurons that fire off anytime you look out and around your environment. They're essentially your neurological lens. Your perceptual filter is nothing other than these wirings that you've created in the brain. These clusters of brain stuff then are like the lens you pop onto a camera. They're what create and maintain the perceptual filters you most use as you look out and engage with your environment, your world. And these perceptual filters are what inform your common responses, your typical habituated, emotionalized responses that you again and again and again generate as you interact with the peoples and situations in your environment. Now, the brain circuit out of which you predominantly operate from is evident in what you present to yourself and others, what you present to yourself and about your world, and what you present to others about yourself, about them, and about the world. If you want to know how you've been hardwired by your upbringing, by your conditioning, if you want to know how you've hardwired yourself, take a look at your typical reactions to people, to situations, to challenges, to the day-to-day stuff that comes up in your experience. Take a look at your most practiced responses, those responses that seem normal to you, that seem natural to you, that are just how you are in the world. Those responses that come so easily. Whether or not these emotionalized responses are positive or negative, they indicate to you or map out for you your own neurology, your own hardwiring. If someone only ever presents to you a worldview of conspiracy and scarcity, for instance, that kind of information can only be woven together and interpreted and translated by particular networks in the brain that have been specifically created and reinforced to only see those kinds of patterns in the environment. You can't be operating out of your evolved circuits and express a suspicious worldview at the same time. You cannot experience personal injury, a kind of victimhood, when you are operating out of your evolved centers of information exchange. information input and information output. Any kind of negative expression, whether it's fearful, paranoid, or combative, whether it's only internal where you're having these types of fearful thoughts, paranoid thoughts, or combative thoughts, or you're expressing them, whether they're internal expressions or externalized expressions, come from the survival circuits. That part of the neurology that can only communicate and interpret information, signals in the environment in terms of fight or flight. It's either in attack mode or it's in being attack mode. It's either striking out through aggression, criticism, diminishing others, indignation, and the like, or it's withdrawing through avoidance, creating distance and separation, and severing communication in other ways. It's either the aggressor or the victim, and it takes everything personally. There's very much the experience of being a separate self when operating out of the self-preservation circuits. It's all about survival. It's all about the preservation of that self, of that identity that's born out of these survival centers of reference. A self that can be attacked, a self that can attack, a self that can combat other selves is what is generated from these older centers of information exchange. Your evolved circuits of being are what allow you to express fearlessness, boundlessness, intelligence, boundless creativity, intuitive insight, and the like. From these circuits, your perspective of the world and the apparent others in it is dramatically different. You can see beyond the calibrations of the nervous system, of body consciousness, which is where that self-preservation and survival circuits emerge out of. You can see past the biosurvival responses, and that even when they do occur, because that preservation of the body is very much a part of the hardwiring in the brain, even when these responses do occur, there's no traction to them for you. They don't hijack you. They don't take you on a ride of any kind. You sort of can observe them from this expanded perspective where you see them, but they don't mean anything to you. So you see past these biological programs and you see past the visible of your world experience into the patterns and movements of the energy systems that are always at work in both your expression of self and experience of world. You have this inexplicable broader perspective, and you can track information to its unseen root fairly easily. You not only get the big picture, you also mold and influence the big picture. You demonstrate it and express behaviors and ways of being in the world, anchor a kind of presence in the world that you can't harmonize with when you're in the more survival circuits. What you call the transcendental state is nothing more than your ability to recognize that your true nature is this broader, expanded presence. You give yourself the ability to recognize this source of being through the nervous system. Your true nature, you as consciousness, are always this higher dimensional presence that is all and sees all. It's always this higher perspective. Regardless of the level of awareness you're operating out of, there's always a higher perspective that your core being resides in. Yet it's not recognizable to you when you're operating out of the biosurvival neural circuits. Identification with body consciousness and the absence of distinction around how regions of the brain only allow you to experience and express certain levels of awareness makes it seem as though it's the real you that experiences those contracted states, those states of tension, those states of being where you experience through the nervous system as a negative emotional experience. But it's not. It's not the real you that experiences this. You're not the body, you're not the mind, you're not the emotional responses that come up day after day. and this is something that's clear to you, often when you're in meditation or in flow or in the zone while doing some activity that you enjoy, there's always this level of pure seeing that has no boundaries that emerges when you turn attention onto itself, when you are in flow, when you are in meditation, when you are in the zone. There's this perceiving intelligence, this atmosphere of perceiving awareness that's always present amidst the habituated chain of responses you fire off moment after moment. And it's when you again and again bring yourself to operate out of this level of awareness that reality takes on a different quality, a more otherworldly or fluid quality that silences those survival programs or that allows you to float above those survival programs. So the question then is, and we always want to make this practical, is how do you do that consistently? How do you consistently operate out of this level of intelligence that's obscured by conditioning, that's veiled by conditioning, by your upbringing, your identification with body consciousness? And the answer is always going to come to practice. You practice self awareness. You practice becoming aware of your psychology, your emotional tendencies, your typical responses, and then bring this intelligence into them. Bring this intelligence into those automated behaviors that have been created that were formed out of the biosurvival programs. You daily examine what level of awareness you're operating from. Are you on autopilot or are you present and aware of what's driving your decisions, what's driving your behaviors, what's driving your responses? What filter are you looking from when you're in conversation with someone? Are you seeing a separate person with a history? Or are you seeing through the mask of personality and seeing this pure living presence that is shining through the person in front of you? What are you connecting to in that moment? Are you connecting, ego to ego? Or are you connecting presence to presence? What level of awareness are you seeing your own being from? And what level of awareness is informing your perception moment after moment? The more you bring this steady self-examination into your day-to-day experience, into those activities that fill up your day, the more you deactivate those habituated responses born of biosurvival programs, the more intelligence you bring into your habits, the more pure awareness you bring into your habits, the more they fall apart. It takes practice, yet you'll notice an immediate awakening and reawakening emerging into your moments where you consistently find yourself expanding out of and waking up from the trance of your automated responses, the trance of your habituated responses, the trance of your conditioning, essentially. You stop being driven by habit and become driven by intelligence. And that's a vastly different way of being in the world.